So you got a Behmor, and maybe you've done one or two auto roasts. You've kind of observed the roast process. You've listened to the sounds and smelled the smells. You've seen the results. And now I'm going to show you how I roast. I roast in a manual mode. That sounds somehow complicated. It's not complicated at all. In fact, I much prefer it because you're going to have to be here by the roaster all the time anyway. So why not participate a little more in the roast process? So again, I've loaded my drum with a ½ pound. It's the size I prefer, the batch I prefer for the Behmor. And let me load that up. I've been very sure that my clasp on my drum is correct, and I am very sure that my drive is engaged and the bracket there that holds the other side of the drum is correct. And I just shove in my chaff collector, I suppose, and close my drum, making sure I have a good seal. And all you do to roast manually is you start an automatic roast. So you can do that any number of ways. Push a ½ pound, and I can just press start. And my roast is going. I check my drum to make sure it's turning, and I listen to make sure there's no weird sounds, and I know I'm good. Now, to go into manual mode, all I need to do is hit any of the profile keys. And what I do is I hit the one, P5, and I see P5 flashing here. P5 means 100% of the electric power to the burners is going to the burners. And I'll explain what these other ones do in manual mode. So what is manual mode? Manual mode is nothing except that you can control your time a little differently on the Behmor, and you can control the power going to the burners. And another feature is you control the drum speed. And a faster drum speed replicates more airflow. If this roaster had an airflow control like a professional roaster does. So that's kind of an intriguing setting. Let me show you how to do those things. But the first thing I do is I basically like to roast by sight and sound and smell. So I like to turn on my light, get a good view into the drum. You know, it's a little yellowed, but it still is informative. And at this stage, I've got 10 minutes, 15 seconds in my ½ pound roast. So I can just sort of go over some of the features. The fact is that the Behmor manual has all this information. You need to read the whole thing, but it's a little convoluted. And one of the things that's difficult is that the functions of the control panel, the meanings of the buttons, have shifted when you go into manual mode. So let's go over what they are. The batch settings at the top remain the same, ½ pound, ¼ pound. 1 pound does have a double function. Now, if you want to leave manual mode for some reason, which I can't imagine, you can hit 1 and go back into a automatic mode. With the same time, it goes to a P1 setting. But I'm just going to go back to manual, which tells me it's manual because it's flashing. Your A, B, C, and D buttons have a different function when you use them before the roast. Now, your A is your exhaust temperature. So it's telling me 129 F where the exhaust is leaving the roaster. B checks your chamber temperature. There's a little thermometer at the side, and that's 183, very early in our roast. C, I don't want to push it. I've made that mistake. C is a function where it resets your timer to 2 minutes and 10 seconds. And you're supposed to use the C button when you're first hear first crack. You're first hear first crack. You hear the pops of first crack, and Behmor has sort of decided that there's a certain amount of time to end the roast for a medium roast, and they've programmed that into the C button. It's different for each setting, but for ½ pound, it's 2 minutes, 10 seconds. And D is a feature that toggles your drum speed. So I'm going to go into fast drum speed mode, and it steps up the drum speed to a little higher rotation, which replicates a little bit more airflow in the roaster, which shapes the roast and a bit in terms of flavor and in terms of the length. And Byron's done a separate video about drum speed changes. Here we have our time increments. So at any time in the roast, I can add or take away 15 seconds. So right there, I just added 15 seconds to my roast by hitting the plus key once. So that'll be useful at the end of the roast as I sort of want to shape how it's going to finish. And a confusing thing here is that these profile keys are now controlling the percentage of electric power going to the burners. The confusing part is that P1 is the highest ramp up, the hottest roast in an automatic mode. It's actually, in manual mode, the lowest power. In fact, it cuts the power off 100% to the burners, whereas P5 is 100% of power to the burners. Let me explain a little about how I roast here. I basically roast in P5, full heat. Why do I do that? It's because my experience on a large number of different types of professional roasters and sample roasters has told me that the Behmor tends to be a very slow ramp, even at the most dramatic and hottest setting, which is actually P5. So, I'm sorry, P1. So this is P1. This is the highest ramp of heat that's possible when you're in an automatic mode. And my experience tells me that even that's a little bit slow and gentle. And what we can do with a Behmor is we can throw all the heat we want at it, and we won't get the problems that occur with roasting coffee too fast initially, which is scorching and tipping. It's not going to happen with a radiant type heat source like the Behmor. So I roast full heat, and then towards the end of the roast, what I like to do is drop my heat a bit by going to P4 or P3. P4 is 75% power, P3 is 50% power, just to finish the roast in a little bit slower, a little more controlled manner. But another feature that I have 10 seconds to respond to is the unattended switch, the autosave. And I hit start. So what's happened there is that 75% of the way through your roast, this machine is going to shut off. It's going to be before first crack, and it's going to go into cooling, so your coffee is really not going to be very pleasant. You have to be here roasting, and Behmor has built that into the machine. 75% of the way through the roast, the burner shuts down, it goes into cooling cycle. If within 30 seconds you don't hit the start key, you'll see UN with a colon and 30-second timer countdown. Just hit the start key at any point during that. If it doesn't, you get ERR7, and you cannot restart your roast at that point. Your roast is toast, so to speak. So the other things I like to do, now I could be waiting for my first crack here, and I could use Behmor's sort of Rosetta Stone, what they call it, timer reset, by hitting the C key. When I hear first crack, it's in this half-pound setting, it's going to give me 2 minutes, 10 seconds to the end of the roast, which they have divined is an ideal amount of time from first crack to end of roast. So let's listen, because we're hearing first crack now. In the Behmor, it's a kind of a muffled sound, but it's very distinct. The later iterations of this roaster run really quiet and smooth. It allows you to hear the roast very, very well. So this is where I start doing my little magic. And what I'm going to do is go down to P3, 50% burner heat, because I want to slow down this roast process a little bit. What I'm hearing is a fairly rapid crack. It's fairly controlled and muffled. But what I like to do is finish my roast a little slower with a little more control. And I'm attending to this. I've got 40 seconds or so. I could be adding time. If I wanted to add quite a lot of time and go into a real dark roast, I could use my C key and add 210. But I'm hearing my first crack slow down. I want a light roast, and I'm good with that right there, and I hit cool. Now the thing is with a Behmor is it's a slow cooling cycle, and the roast coasts into the cooling time. So I'm continuing to roast to some degree, and what you really need to learn to do is to anticipate where you want that final roast to be and to stop your roast at a time before that. And that takes some experience. But especially for those who want a really dark roast, you need to stop your roasts, be very conservative, stop them early, because if you go into a second crack, especially on a Behmor, if you hear second crack in the machine, you're going to be going very dark, with factoring in the coasting. So stop your roast early, be conservative. And the other thing I really like to do is I like to actually, and this is a little controversial, I like to remove my batch from the roaster before the cooling cycle is completed. So I want to show you how I do that. It's a little bit controversial because it's not great for the machine, so you take a bit of a risk, and you need to protect yourself because you'll get burned otherwise. Okay, so here's my cooling technique that's not totally recommended. What I do is I shut the power off on the Behmor. It's 2 minutes into cooling, and I work quickly. As you can see, I'm protecting myself because this is hot. Boy, that's hot too. Here's my roast. Okay, so what I've done is I've quickly removed the batch from the roaster. I've put it into a colander to cool it down, and I've turned the roaster back on without the drum in it through the cooling cycle to complete the cooling cycle. It's not great for the machine because the machine needs to cool down itself, and also there's some residual chaff that's now potentially going to go into the burners. But I prefer to cool a roast faster than the Behmor is capable. So I can use a colander, but my technique lately is either to shift between two pans. A baking sheet is good, and what you're trying to do is just transfer the heat out of the coffee by exposing it to cool surfaces. But my favorite technique is to take a pan and to put it in a sink in a small bath of water to cool it down. I just need to make sure that I don't get the coffee wet at all because that is not good for coffee. So let's cool it. So I just have my roast in any pan. I put it on the bottom and I put it in a bath of water there. Nice high-sided pan so I don't risk any drips there. This was a technique that a lot of our customers were using, and I never liked it. And since I've been roasting a lot more at my own home recently, I've actually taken to this because I found that shuffling between pans took quite a long time to cool. What we really like is for coffee to be cool to the touch in 4 minutes. That's why I like to remove it from the Behmor, because you're cooling in the same chamber that you've roasted in. So it's really hard to get rid of, to lose a lot of heat very quickly inside the chamber. So taking it out helps that. You can actually cool coffee too quickly. It does have a detrimental effect on the flavor if you cool it, for example, 30 seconds. So if you have some magic technique to cool coffee instantly, you might want to consider slowing it down a little. But if you can get coffee cool to the touch in 4 minutes, that's great. And right here, we're well on our way.